And meanwhile,
we're robbing each other blind and trying to squash the little man, just like every other business out there.
welcome to the 3% Podcast. This is Chad Post from Open Letter Books, and I'm here with Tom Roberts from Riff Raff.
That's right.
Which is Providence's #1 independent bookstore.
That's right. We're not even open yet, and we're already laying claim to that.
It's totally fine. You can just say anything you want, remember? Like, that's how world we live in. Speaking of, before you get into anything, are there any updates on the status of Riff Raff?
Not in a really tangible way. Our exemption for the liquor license is in the State House right now. I have 2 sponsors for it in both houses. And our landlord is finishing up construction that he needs to finish before we can get in there. Typical bureaucracy with, a formerly fairly corrupt mafia-run city. It's weird. Most people here in the city system, as someone I talked to today refers to it as the city services realm, are incredibly helpful and really just especially for small businesses, really want to help you. And then you run into this one corner of the bureaucracy where they just don't give a fuck about anything, and nothing you do or say will get them to do anything any quicker. And that's all there is to it. And it's very frustrating, but it's just something you have to wait through. And then the weird thing is that everyone tells you the same story. They're like, oh yeah, we had to do that. Oh yeah, we've had the same thing. And it's always had it worse than you, which is the very, thing to sort of tell yourself at night, but it doesn't make it feel any better as we get easier and antsier here. But in theory, we should get in soon, and we have an eye towards opening sometime in April. So
nice. That's coming up very quickly.
Not quickly enough, as far as we're concerned. But.
Yeah, I can imagine. Although I wonder if that'll change once you start doing everything. Once you're in there and start doing everything, and that will seem like you don't have enough time to get everything to the spot you want it to be in.
Yeah, well, we do have so much time to plan everything out that I know exactly where every device and bottle of alcohol is going behind the wall. All that stuff, so...
That's true. Right. And so you guys, I guess before we get into the Winter Institute stuff, we should take a minute to say that last night, or I guess yesterday at some point, I assume, that Harry Mathews passed away at the age of 86 in Key West. And he was the first American member of the LIPO. I was a huge fan of his. I think you're a huge fan of his as well.
Yes.
And it sucks that he died now.
Yes. On the other hand, I'm impressed he made it to 86.
Yeah, that man could drink.
He could drink. He certainly could drink. And the last time I saw him was, I'm going to guess, 4 years ago.
Oh, that's more recent than I saw him.
He was definitely, walking with a cane, needed some help getting around and upstairs and that sort of thing. Yeah. But his mind was all there. It was just physically, you could kind of tell he was, on the decline. But he lived a good, full, happy life, I would like to imagine.
Yeah, and had tons of adventures.
Tons of adventures, all of which are sort of fictionalized in his books. If you haven't read them, go out. They're amazing.
Which books are your favorites?
Oh, my favorite is probably Cigarettes.
Yeah, me too.
But I do have a soft spot for My Life in CIA, even though that one seems kind of, I don't want to say minor, but it doesn't have the sort of complexity that the other ones do. It's so damn fun to read.
That's the first one I specifically worked on with him.
My Life in CIA.
Yep, and that's the one that he gave the reading at. What's it called? 192 Books, and there was a plant in the audience that got up and accused him of being CIA. Still, and had had a story about it, and that he had to sort of make up his own response to. Right. Yeah, that book was fun to do, though. Even if it's I don't think it's as technically or as Olympian. There aren't as many Olympian parts to it, or those kind of intellectual games to it. It's still a super fun book.
Yes,
we did that, and then The Case of the Persevering Maltese and The Human Country were the three in a row. Like the Human Country being collected stories, and The Case of Persevering Maltese being his like nonfiction. And we did all three of those, like basically, I think like 4 years, over 4 year period or something. And that's when I worked with him the most at Dalkey.
Was he good to work with?
Oh yeah, yeah. He's super easygoing and like was basically up for doing anything, and like generally just like very pleased when we like send him any suggestions or questions or edits, and that's how I went and had dinner at his house, and it happened to be weirdly the day that I went and had dinner at his apartment in New York was the day that his first wife died, or that they had been the day after, because when I got there he was giving an interview to someone, I think it was like the New York Times, about her obituary and about her. So I guess it's just weird coincidence that comes to mind in terms of death things, but yeah, he was fantastic, and all the books are really, really good.
Yeah, I think I have almost all of his books. They're so damn good. Yes.
I lost a few of them in the divorce. Like Cigarettes is gone. I know that because I looked last night. But I still have Singular Pleasures, which is entertaining, and which we used to market as like a Valentine's Day book.
I'm going to do that next year.
It's sort of perfect. It's like for anyone who's not into Valentine's Day, Singular Pleasures is your go-to. Yeah, so I guess
borrow it.
Yeah. How many of the original, not original, I guess, because original is a misnomer, but of like that core group of the Lippian writers are still around?
Unless they're, unknown people that I don't know of, I can't imagine there are too many.
Okay, here's the founding members. Founding members, there are none. Then list of members, there's a million. Paul Fresnel is still alive. He was one of the early ones. Jacques Jouet. Hervé Letellier, he's not that early, but he's still alive. Ian Monk. Jacques Ribot. Jacques Ribot would probably be the oldest of the remaining.
Yeah.
The one who's been associated with them the longest.
Who else?
Benabou is still alive.
How old is Fresnel?
Fresnel is older. Like, I want to say I'm going to guess like he's 65, but he was born in 1947. So he's 70. Yeah, so a couple years older than I thought. He joined the Lipo in 72, so he's been there longer than I've been alive.
And Jouet, how old do we say he is?
Jouet is slightly younger, I think.
47? That makes him 70.
Yeah. Oh, so same age. And then Ribot would be the one that I would think of as being affiliated the longest.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know when he was born. It doesn't say. Oh, 32. Yeah, 32. So he's the oldest, and I think he joined like very early. It doesn't say on his Wikipedia page, but I think from like the beginning, he became a member. Or beginning of his career, that is.
Anyway,
yeah.
Go
so
Harry Mathews if you never have. That's my advice.
I agree, and all the books are great. I remember one other story about it was that when I lived in North Carolina, when I was reading a bunch of his books, that was more or less when I was working at the bookstore that I more or less discovered him and read everything, like one book after another. And we had a snowstorm, like a freak snowstorm in North Carolina. At that point, like whatever global warming trends have changed, I think they get snowstorms more frequently. But at that point, they hadn't had snow in God knows how long. So like just the littlest bit of snow like shut down the bookstore and everything for like 2 days. And I spent those 2 days just inside reading The Sinking of Odradek Stadium. So I always remember that was the time that I read that, was just on a 2-day snow break from the bookstore in North Carolina, where people built snowmen and thought that it was just the most amazing thing.
I'm impressed they got enough snow to actually build snowmen.
It was like 12 inches over like a 24-hour period. I mean, it was a freak snowstorm that like blew everyone's mind.
All right.
Winter Institute?
Winter Institute, sure. We've talked about this before. I am going in a different capacity this year. I've usually gone as a publisher with New Directions in order to meet booksellers, meet the on the floor booksellers mostly, in addition to the owners and the buyers. But Also, the on-the-floor booksellers, because those are the people that tend not to go to Book Expo in New York because, one, it's so expensive, and it really is geared towards owners and that sort of thing. But the ABA has made Winter Institute slightly more affordable. It's generally not, it's never going to be in New York. It's in these smaller places. Flights are cheaper, hotels are cheaper, all that sort of stuff. And it just has a smaller feel of a conference, as opposed to, it feels more like these regional conferences than it does like Book Expo. There's not really the big floor of, filling up the entire Javits Center with, row after row of massive sort of installation, marketing displays of the big books coming out in the fall. It's definitely geared towards independent bookstores, and independent publishers and big publishers sort of stand on equal footing in terms of their capacity to do things. And so it brings out a different sort of vibe altogether. Anyway, this year I'm going as a bookstore owner, which means that I have to pay attention to like the actual program of what's going on, as opposed to doing the little speed dating sort of rep pick things and then buying booksellers dinner and drinks. So I will be going to, sort of panel discussions about, how to turn social media presence into sales, and how to, I know I've identified one panel about transforming prize winners into better sellers, that sort of thing.
Oh, right.
Yeah, Lisa Lucas is going from the National Book Foundation, and she's on the panel. And I'm just curious to see how.
And she's going to have listened to our podcast about where we say no one pays attention to the National Book Award winners.
I think she's aware of it. I think that's part of why she's going, and part of why she's doing this panel is, part of her agenda, her mission since she got hired is to sort of translate, the sort of insular attention that the National Book Awards get in the publishing and book world into a larger sort of cultural phenomenon among book readers, among consumers, whether that's at the libraries. I'm sure she's been to ALA conferences as well, or at independent bookstores, where presumably it would work more than chain bookstores. Because, in the past, we've talked about this before, the Nobel will get an author some recognition, and the Pulitzer, and nothing else.
Yeah.
It's sad, but it's just the way it is. People just only have so much, the casual readers who are not obsessive only have so much space to pay attention to. And, they know who wins the Nobel, and they know who wins the Pulitzer, because those things are talked about in NPR and the New York Times will send you a news alert and all that sort of stuff. It's like the only movie awards people know about are the Oscars and the Golden Globes. And yet, if you go to like the IMDb page for, Moonlight, for example, which got plenty of nominations for both, it already has like a long list of nominations and awards from these festivals and other sort of ceremonies that take place in the U.S. and around the world, which people just don't really know about. Anyway, it's always good to go to it's good for me as a bookseller, I think, to go to these things, to hear what other booksellers have to say about it, because it's one thing to base my sort of actions on what I've experienced in bookstores in New York City. It's quite different to hear what other people have to say about, working at a bookstore, in North Carolina, for example, like what they think their customers' response to prizes and different merchandising things might be in relation to ours up here in the Northeast. You just never know what you're going to hear. It's totally impossible to predict the sort of insular culture of another bookstore until you actually hear from the people who work on the floor there.
Yeah, and these do get, for anyone who's not going or hasn't ever looked at this, there are like there's a number of them that deal with like marketing issues, but then ones that are like the new localism, advocating for a stronger local community, technology, local search engine optimization, the one on merchandising and selling graphic novels, defining marketing, but also like working with publisher reps, integrating used books in your inventory, and the one I thought you might be going to, finance, securing capital.
Well, in theory, we're past that point. Not to say that we wouldn't appreciate a little more capital before we open. But we did that all 6 months ago.
The next day is finance for small stores, budgeting for cash flow.
Right, that kind of thing. Which, the thing I will say, like having looked at the schedule of events, which by the way is open to the, like you're looking at it now, it's open to the public. You don't need to sign in or anything. Everyone can see it. Mm-hmm. And we should put the link in the show page. Is that they really do offer panels and workshops and that sort of thing for the whole gamut of bookseller employees, whether you just started or are an owner who's had a store for 20 years. There's something there for you to sort of learn something from. Like you said with the graphic novel one, like it doesn't seem like it should be rocket science, but at the same time, like you could benefit from hearing how other people have done it and like the little nuances to that sort of consumer demographic and to those publishers and all of that sort of thing. I mean, everything is different, you know?
Right. Like even like during that one time that you, during the same period when you're going to the Making the Most Literary Awards, this gives a really good cross-section of types of things that you can learn. Working with small and university presses, bookselling 101, writing effective blurbs, maximizing margin, making the most of literary awards, navigating family relationships in business, and then introduction to Edelweiss Plus for booksellers. So that's like, that hits at like a ton of different things that bookstores deal with. And for different people at different levels, like would be more interested in various ones, but that's a very broad range of bookselling as a whole, and not just like, you know, you have a store, here's what a store is. Like it does get into like very specifics.
Yes.
There is, sorry, go on.
Oh no, I was just going to say that it is, there's definitely an agenda, if you look closely, wherein they're trying to push sort of better relationships between booksellers and small presses and the reps in particular, which I appreciate. I'm glad that it's there because that isn't there at BEA very much.
Yeah, I don't really look at what BA's programming is, to be honest, like not very often, except when I have to go to or be on a panel. But other than that, I generally don't pay attention to it. So, but I don't think there's much, and there doesn't seem to be as much detail this way. It tends to be much more of like presentations from reviewers or from other book-related places, I guess. That's not very specific, but it doesn't seem as nuanced, I guess, as these do. Are you going to go to, so Roxane Gay is giving one of the keynotes, but there's another breakfast keynote from Kim Scott. Have you read this person's bio?
No, I have no idea who that is.
Holy shit. So let me just read this because it's kind of crazy. Kim Scott is the co-founder and CEO of Candor Inc. She is the author of Radical Candor, Be a Kick-Ass Boss Without Losing Your Humanity, to be published by St. Martin's Press in March 2017. Kim has been an advisor at Dropbox, Kurbo, Qualtrics, Ship, which is spelled wrong, Twitter, and several other tech companies. Well, I guess it's spelled like a tech company, SHYP. She was a member of the faculty at Apple University, and before that led AdSense, YouTube, and DoubleClick online sales and operations at Google. Previously, Kim was a co-founder and CEO of Juice Software, a collaboration startup, and led business development at Delta 3 and Capital Thinking. Early in her career, Kim worked as a senior policy advisor at the FCC, managed a pediatric clinic in Kosovo, started a diamond cutting factory in Moscow, and was an analyst on the Soviet Companies Fund. This is a random array of things.
She's in the CIA.
She's totally CIA. Started a diamond cutting factory in Moscow.
Yeah, that's serious.
Yeah.
They don't let just anyone do that.
Up until that point, like none of these things I have heard of, except for like Dropbox, Google, and Apple. And YouTube, I suppose. But like then that. What's that?
What does she do now?
She is the CEO of Candor Inc., like Candor, like Candor.
Okay. Am I supposed to know what that is?
I have no idea. I'm not the first clue as to what that could possibly be. I'm going to guess it's a consulting firm.
Probably. Something to do with data, I'm going to guess.
It is. I found it. Maybe. Radical candor is the ability to challenge directly and show you care personally at the same time. Radical candor will help you and all the people you work with do the best work of your lives and build the best relationships of your career. Radical candor really just means saying what you think while also giving a damn about the person you're saying it to. Why is it so rare that such a simple thing feels radical? At Candor Inc., we are building a set of tools that make it much easier to be radically candid.
Wait, one needs a company to do that?
Apparently just saying that, whoa, there's a Fitbit, your Fitbit for feedback, the candor gauge, and it has colors like manipulative insecurity, ruinous empathy, radical candor, and obnoxious aggression to determine like what type of person you are. I shouldn't make fun of this. This is dumb.
That is dumb. Yeah. Let me just say this about the breakfast keynotes. I do intend to go to Roxanne's, definitely. But after that, I intend on being pretty hungover and not making it to 7:30 a.m. panels.
Yeah, they start at 7:45 a.m.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
No one wants to be there at 7:45. There's a cartoon on here that's a dog walking away from its owner saying, "It's always good dog, never great dog."
All right. Way off topic. That is who is this woman? I feel like she must have paid for that appearance for that slot, and the ABA was, happy to take her money.
I guess that's yeah. Who knows? But yeah, so you're gonna have to report back on how all of this goes, and what you take away from it for riffraff too.
Yes, and what sweet galleys I get. We'll see.
Oh, that's true. You're gonna get all the hot new books. that you don't know ahead of time. They don't tell you ahead of time who's gonna be there or like which books to be aware of.
I feel like if I dug into it, I could figure out what authors are there, but you never know which of them are actually there for the author reception, which means they have galleys, or just there speaking generally. So
yeah, that's true. That makes sense. Yeah, there's tons of people listed here, but they're not anyone. Oh, right. Yeah, no, there's like a ton of authors, but I don't know what any of them are about. So, anyways, okay, enough of Winter Institute, I suppose.
Enough of Winter Institute.
I wish I could be there, but it'd be fun.
It would. We will miss you.
Yeah, I would have skipped out on part of it though to go watch the Timberwolves. So. Priorities, man. I don't need more drinks after 4 days of drinking. I think I'd be good.
So can we talk a little bit about your sudden inspiration to write? I don't know how long these are in words.
7,000 million pages, approximately.
Essays that you're now posting on the 3% blog.
Sure.
So start what I believe was the first one, which is reader selection and market acceleration.
Actually, the first one was before that, in which I talked about the class that I'm teaching, and that was really the inspiration. If you're asking what the real inspiration was, is that every spring, as I've talked about in here a million times, teach a class on world literature and translation, and I posted a thing about the books I was going to use, and then suggested that I would try and write something each week that sort of related or ran in parallel to things that came up when I was thinking about what I was going to teach in the class. So like books I was reading for the class will hopefully, if I continue this, like God knows, like it's hard enough to find time to write anything, much less something that's that long. But that theoretically would include like stuff related to the books that we're using in class, like all the fiction works that we're using. And then beforehand, it was a lot of things I just read because I wanted to know about them and see if they added anything interesting to talking about books in class. And then the second part of it, the second sort of other inspiration part was that I wrote that really long thing about publishing and culture and reading when I was in Marfa. And I don't think that manuscript is ever going to see the light of day. So I'm going to steal a bunch of like ideas from it and rework them into these long posts, mixed in with the idea that like I have 1 day a week in which I don't have to continually pay attention to do things for other people. So I've just taken that 1 day to drink and write really long bits. As if that makes that less nerdier than it already sounds. But basically, like on Saturday nights, I get excited and drink a bottle of wine and write that.
Right. The drinking, I imagine, is a key part.
It is absolutely the most crucial part.
So I did not read the one about your class, although I am familiar with your class. And I was actually, I think it's in the second one where you mentioned something about your students being surprised. But let's start here with reader selection and market acceleration. So I've highlighted some things, and I'm just going to ask you questions about them so that we can talk about them. Okay. But they are so long that, yes, people should go and read these. So first, you are talking about, I'm going to say his name is Moretti. Yes.
That's how I'd say it too, yeah.
So Moretti talks about, so you quote Moretti here, who's talking about doing an analysis of Sherlock Holmes mysteries and why they were so popular in their time and why they've stood the test of time when virtually none others from that time period have. And we mean specifically British murder mysteries of that time period. Yep. So you're quoting him here, and he says, but it's important to disentangle the two discrete processes that converge onto this single outcome, the process that centers on readers and on their selection of Doyle's form of solution over those of his rivals meaning other writers, and the other one in which the market amplifies that initial selection over and over again. Readers and markets, in other words, are both causal agents, but in different ways, in the sense that readers select and then markets magnify. And then you explain a little bit here, and you said, this is where I want to turn from Moretti to the current literary marketplace, especially as it relates to translations and the creation of buzz and acceleration. My working observation, and you in parentheses have, I hesitate to use the word hypothesis, given the paucity of data that I have at hand. My working observation is that the acceleration of two related phenomena, media and the ability to comment on media, has resulted in a situation in which the processes of reader selection and market magnification have become divorced from one another and now essentially reversed. So, what does this mean in layman's terms? For me, for somebody who has a literary blog, for somebody who is on Twitter all day talking about books?
Yeah, so to back up just a bit when he talked about the Holmes thing, I mean, I think that his quote is pretty clear, but basically what they did in his class was he took a bunch of stories from the magazine and from these two books, from the magazine that Holmes's stories were published in, and from these two books that were published a few years ago that were like anthologies of like Sherlock Holmes. I think they were literally called Sherlock Holmes's Rivals, and there were other mystery stories from that point in time. And they tried to identify like one particular component, being clues in this case, and divided then all the stories up into like which ones included clues and which ones didn't to solve the mystery, and then had varying parts of that. Like, were the clues like obvious, or were they explicitly stated, or was it at the very end that the detective's like, oh, and there's this clue that existed that the reader wasn't privy to prior to that, and sort of traced through that and found that only a very small portion of the stories use clues in a specific way, which has become like the way that we think of clues being used, where they're in the text, they're in the description, there's something that you can sort of puzzle out frequently, whatever, like the sort of sequence of that. And they all happen to be Sherlock Holmes stories that did it in this particular way, even though there was a good number of Sherlock Holmes stories that did not use clues in that way, that it was like sort of a trick that he figured out maybe accidentally and didn't use every single time. But then once that it became clear that that kind of thing was something that resonated with readers, then he sort of looks at the expansion of like the acceleration of that then all the Sherlock Holmes became kind of the one writer from that period of time, because he had done something that people responded to. Then it sort of keeps accelerating, and he may not have been that much of a better writer, that much more interesting than some of these other people. However, by this point in time, you only know Sherlock Holmes stories and you don't know anyone else, right? And so my thing was that nowadays, where he's talking about like books and writers and whomever else being sort of like all laid out there, and that people respond to them, and then once they start responding to them, then this sort of acceleration and like the idea that more people read book X because they like it, or author X because they like it, and they tell other people, and more attention gets paid to that, and more attention, and that sort of accelerates in that way that like any sort of artwork or any sort of thing happens, where suddenly everyone knows about it and everyone's talking about that singular book. That nowadays, I don't know that it's as reader driven as it is that a lot of not for everything and not for every book, but a lot of things are sort of predetermined that they are going to get that sort of acceleration before anyone even reads them. That we are already anticipating which books are going to be those big books, and then that sort of becomes self-defining in that we don't leave things as wide open to like we read 10 books and then pick the one that's best and then cover that. Because of like the pre-selected buzz, we already know which one of those 10 books we're going to cover, and they sort of work backwards from there. And that's given us a different texture to like the way that books get discovered and get marketed and get talked about and create that sort of all-encompassing being the one book that everyone's read or everyone knows about.
Yeah, here's the thing. So I do think that's true. I just wonder if this is not a necessary facet of a culture that produces so many books every year. I mean, what you're talking about basically is the lack of individual discovery or the space to do so unless you like truly unplug from Twitter, Facebook, all of these blogs, every newspaper's book section or anything like that, and sort of rely on your own instincts to guide you through a bookstore. And that would even mean ignoring stacks of books on tables and that sort of thing. I mean, we are suffering a little bit from a bit of information overload, and maybe this is a result of all of that happening. I don't know that it's good or bad or anything, but I do think you're right that it is sort of flipped in that the lab that used to exist for Conan Doyle to sort of, to borrow your phrase there, puzzle out which of his Holmes stories is successful and why, and which resonates with readers, and that sort of, feedback loop sort of process no longer exists because we no longer need the feedback. The feedback is the sales. And at a certain point, and I think this is one of those horrible aspects of contemporary, not just literature, but contemporary art in general, is that once a certain sort of author or filmmaker or actor or whatever sort of reaches this threshold, it's almost impossible for them to fail.
Yeah.
The sales on every Stephen King book from here until he dies, and probably long after, because I'm sure there are things that are unpublished, will always be what they are. They're not going to suddenly fall off a cliff because the books, are bad. It's people will still buy them. There's no question of whether or not it's going to be good. They give him the benefit of the doubt every last time. And we do this too. I mean, I bought the last Javier Marias and it was not very good, but I still bought it and gave it a chance. If I had waited a few months and trusted the reviewers, I could have realized that maybe it wasn't worth my time. But we all do this for certain people. The problem, and I think this is what you're basically trying to get at, is that when unknown quantities or quantities that are very little known sort of appear out of nowhere with an attendant sort of buzz and a hype machine working around them, and it becomes impossible to ignore them, and then a certain number of consumers give in to that, and then it just becomes this tidal wave. But it turns out that maybe it didn't deserve all the hype and buzz in the first place.
Yeah, another way that I was trying to think about it I'm trying to make this not super judgmental, because I'm not sure, like you say, like it's just a facet of the times, much less of like there's not necessarily like that it's horrible. It's just the way that things happen to be. But another way to think about it is that what are the reasons? What are the market forces? Or what are the forces that cause something to get that acceleration? If it's not selection, if it's not based on reading a bunch of books and selecting ones for various reasons, what are the mechanisms that are causing it to get that tidal wave before anyone knows what that book is?
I mean, you know what they are.
Hopefully.
They're economics, and that's all there is to it. It's capitalism. I mean, capitalism exists, and there's nothing you can do about it. Even if you're a nonprofit, I mean, you have to stay afloat. You have to convince people that what you're doing is worthwhile. And more often than not, proving that means demonstrating a certain interest in what you do. And interest, more often than not, is demonstrated through sales or adoptions in classrooms. Or
I think I agree with you, Ben. I'm taking a step back from that before then. So before there are sales or before there are anything, with the book that receives all the hype prior to anyone really paying any attention to it, that there are economics behind that too. But those inequalities and the way that those things happen, I think are more of what I want to talk about in the future. Like, why do those books get that sort of pre-anticipatory buzz when no one's read them? And some of it could be from, or for a different reason. It's not like it's automatically that the sales of those are going to be good because they've already got the buzz. Then the sales happen and it creates that sort of feedback loop.
Right. Well, I do think it still boils down to economics, right? It's they paid a certain amount of money for this book, or they've decided to spend a certain amount of marketing budget on this book. All of that sort of feeds into it. And then on the other end, on the other side of it, and you talk a little bit about this, is like a bookstore to stay afloat needs to sell these books, even if they don't necessarily agree with the buzz. And then all the reviewers in between, consumers and the publishers, in order to stay relevant, in order to get page views, in order to do all that sort of stuff, has to talk about the books that everyone else is talking about to a certain extent. It's not like the New York Times book review is going to start reviewing Stephen King or James Patterson anytime soon. They will, they're going to review the big new Paul Auster book or whatever. They just are, because they have to sort of maintain sort of mass appeal beyond the individual reviewers or editors' sort of particular literary tastes. And so it becomes this circle of, well, hey, everyone's talking about this, we need to talk about it. And track of why everyone was talking about it in the first place, right?
Right.
Yes. So you have, moving down a little bit here, the majority of book criticism, if we want to talk about this for a little bit, which in general, I would also say there's a big, huge caveat here, which is that I'm not so sure any of this matters to a reader in a bookstore when they go to pick things up. It certainly matters online with Amazon and all of that, but big caveat. Anyway, so you say the majority of book criticism being written today is operating in one of two spheres: the personal, professional blog, which includes everything from Flavor Wire to Quarterly Conversation to Words Without Borders, to Asymptote to Tony's Reading List to Complete Review of Arabic Literature in English. Or the professional legacy arena, which includes online journals like Salon or Slate, which pay their writers to Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, LA Times, New York Times, The Nation, and other entities that are obviously more corporate and concerned with revenue flows, be it from subscriptions or paid advertisement. Both of these spheres live or die by the page view like retweet. Thanks to this moment of quantifiable late capitalism, basically everyone has to justify themselves by generating clicks. Granted, the local blogger who, quote, does it for fun can engage with books or more likely social politics in a way that pays no mind to the number of visitors their piece draws in. But that doesn't mean anything, since criticism with no stakes is hardly criticism. And also, everyone writes out of self-interest and a desire for enough people to read and respect them. So basically, yes, everyone who even claims they aren't doing it for page views is absolutely doing it for page views. And to deny that is just ridiculous. Individual writers might not be doing it, but editors, some making a decision to run that book.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Based on page views, because they need ad revenue to keep the website afloat.
Yep.
And this goes for even something like The Millions. They have to pay attention to things. And they stick to the generally sort of literary spectrum of book publishing, but they definitely cover things great and small, and that's how you stay afloat.
Absolutely.
And you say, I missed the beginning of this. We'll get to this in a moment, but the great first half of 2017 book review from The Millions is this idea that these are, list makers and how many of the books they've actually read yet and all that sort of stuff. And then you say, this happens by necessity, but also raises the question of what elements are at play to make the contributors anticipate these particular books instead of others. The answer to this is probably pretty obvious, but still, are they looking for the best books or the most hypes? Again, having a book appear on one of these lists doesn't cause it to become popular or successful, but given the overlap between these lists, mainstream reviews, bookstore availability, and sales, all of which should be investigated in a different post, it's very likely that the particular books on these lists will become the ones dominating the cultural conversation. Everything converges to support a very small number of titles, pre-selected from a pool of titles far too large to thoroughly explore and evaluate. Yes, that is it in a nutshell.
Yeah.
There's not much to say about it. I mean, it sort of is the way it is, and unfortunately, it's a sort of game that we all have to play.
One of the things I want to do in the future, if I pick this thread up, I think, is like what that means then for people who consider themselves to be well-read today. Like, are we redefining book culture into just this little group of titles? Like, it's I don't know. It's just like, yeah, there's nothing really to say, and there's not even necessarily a judgment. But I think it's just interesting. I think that's where this is all coming from. It's not even like super mind blowing, but we don't talk about it that often. It doesn't seem like you just sort of go along with things. And I also I'll tell you this because you'll appreciate this. If I can ever find the time to do this during the week, which I have not been able to, I wanted to each week add two other types of blog posts to 3% blog. One being numbers generated from the translation database. So like the first one I was going to do is looking up all the books that are in there from the past 10 years that were self-translated, just because I wondered how many there were and like if they fit if there are certain type of languages that are much more likely to be self-translated than others, or if there's anything with that, but like it could be there's any number of things you can try and query from the database and just see what the trends or the numbers are. And the other one was, rather than doing books from January that you should read, doing everything backwards and saying books you should have read from last January, and going and only looking backwards at things instead of or those lists that these anticipatory lists, but looking at them as which books of these were actually then successful or good or whatever.
Right. I mean, I think I made a joke about that last year when we talked about it. Can't wait for the follow-up in which they reveal that 90% of these were not worth the paper they were printed on.
Yeah,
never going to get that. It's all about looking to the future and hype. It's all it is. The only sort of roundup, I suppose you could say, the only sort of reckoning with all of this is when the award short lists and long lists come out, and that's it.
But
right?
maybe I don't know about that either, because there's very few times that we look at those and we talk about them on here and they're surprising. They're generally books that we know of, and they were sort of part of the same grouping. But maybe
I don't know. I mean,
I don't
we'll
know
get
either.
to the list in a minute. I did want to talk about your other essay very quickly. Partly, it's more people need to read it. I think this one, there's not much you go through specifics. But you talk about here, you're going back to your class, one of the toughest things to explain to my publishing students is why bookstore buyers bring certain titles into their stores. It's easy enough to grasp that a store can't carry everything, but the mechanisms behind the decision-making can seem bafflingly opaque. Is that true? Your students just don't get it?
In the sense that that's maybe overstating it a bit. In the sense that one of their objectives or one of their assignments in the class is that they have to take one of the books that they proof that we're publishing and then write the marketing plan that we fill out for consortium, like the jacket copy, the marketing and publicity activities that are going to go on, the elevator pitch, all that kind of stuff together, and what are the selling and marketing points to tell bookstore buyers. And generally, the only thing they ever come back to is that they really like the book, and that the belief is that if a book is good, bookstores will automatically carry it, and that you need to just tell them about the book itself rather than any of the other stuff that goes around why they're going to carry a book. So it's more like that, and they just can't get it. That there are books that might not be good, but stores are always going to carry, and that you sometimes need to talk about books in that way.
Also, if we took, as booksellers, if I took every sales rep's word on what books were good, I'd have 20,000 books in my space that holds 8,000.
Yep.
And then I'd have to replace all of them next season for another 20,000. Because everyone thinks what they publish is good. And
so some of that stuff of this is a good book, but what's important is that it is being excerpted in these places, that the author is doing this tour through this part of the world, that it's related to this, whatever, all that kind of other stuff, the marketing stuff, the publicity stuff, and even like the things where it's like, well, you do a book on NASCAR and there are like 3 million NASCAR fans or whatever, things like that. Those connections the students don't make. They tend to make a connection between like the content of the book and that if that is well written, that a store will automatically stock it.
Wow.
And but I don't think that that's just the students. I think most people who are not involved in publishing or book selling would assume that a bookstore is carrying the books that are like great books.
Yeah.
And that's not really, I mean, there's a lot of other things they do. I mean, you guys are going to carry, I mean, booksellers that are like keyed into things carry books that they need to carry because they need to sell them, but also like books that they particularly like, things that they would like to push, be it for political reasons or whatever else, or aesthetic. But there's also all these other reasons. And I don't know that people really know. It's hard. It's really hard once you've been working in this to like pull yourself out of it entirely and go back to a time in which you had just entered bookstores and sort of had like a pre-Amazon days, especially, where it's sort of naive vision that this is just what's available and that this must be the best of what's available.
That's interesting. I never thought of it that way. It's hard. It is very hard to go back. I'm just thinking aloud here. I wonder if this explains the sort of very indignant sort of surprise when, and I'm sure you encountered this, when self-published authors don't understand why you won't carry their books.
Yep. Yeah.
The
Absolutely.
part must be that, like, clearly they think their own book is good.
Right.
And they just don't understand why you wouldn't want to have a good book, right?
Right. Why wouldn't you?
It's funny. I mean, I definitely remember, I didn't start working in a bookstore until 2004, 5, I want to say. And before that, when I was in college and like right after I got back from the Peace Corps, brief time before I worked in a bookstore, I definitely was like going to bookstores, but it was in New York City. And, I would always find something because I was never looking for anything specific. I wasn't really clued in to all of this buzz. There was no Twitter. There was no Facebook. Right. No any of this stuff. I do remember very specifically, maybe this explains why I got into publishing and why I got into book selling specifically, whatever year it was that The Elementary Particles was published.
Oh, wow.
I read a review of it in the New York Times Book Review on Sunday, and I was like, okay, clearly this is a book I need to read. And went to, because it was like on my way home from work one day, the Barnes & Noble in Union Square, and I showed them the review, and I was like, do you have this? And the guy behind the counter was like, no, but we can order it. And I remember thinking like, yeah, there are many, many books, many of which are probably very good, that are not in the store.
That's
and
crazy.
Just start like exploring what those might be.
I remember that book because I think we reviewed it at Delkey. When did that come out? It would have been in like 2000 or 2001, right?
Yeah, I moved to New York in 2001.
So I think So I think we reviewed it at the Review of Contemporary Fiction, and that the book review editor was like, "This looks really cool." And I remember buying it from the Barnes & Noble in Bloomington Normal, where it was on display, of all things.
Really?
Yep. I think it was like a one of those New Voices sort of things.
Yikes. That's interesting. I mean, look, I love that book, but that's weird that they were trying to push it that way.
It was a big. It was a big book in terms of like from Random House and the amount that it had sold in France and how it was a phenomenon and all that kind of stuff. Like it had a lot of those markings.
Yes, I wouldn't say it was like a huge success. I'm trying to figure out, was it even published in hardcover?
Yeah,
it was.
Yeah, I'm trying to see if because I remember it blew up in France, and that was like where it was like a huge deal, hundreds of thousands of copies.
Yeah, November 13th, 2001. Yep, I moved to New York like 2 weeks before that. So
won the International Dublin Literary Award too.
Is that the one that
Unpacked
won? Yeah.
Yeah, which has they keep changing the name on it, so I don't know what it is anymore. I guess
under Impact, but something like that.
Yeah, it is now no longer called that.
All right, going back to this essay about comps and bookstore sort of what you're trying to do with all of this data and metadata that you provide to your sales reps, who are not just your sales reps, but hundreds of other sales reps, or reps for hundreds of other small publishers of various sizes. You're probably on the big end, honestly, of what Consortium distributes, no?
In terms of literary fiction of a certain type.
Yeah.
I think that there's other presses that are clearly much bigger, like Coffee House, Akashic, a lot of people like that, but then also like a lot of their other categories that aren't doing literary fiction per se, but are doing like
Right.
AK Press, things like that. I think those are far bigger than we are. But if you get down to like just one little subset, I think we're one of the bigger ones, sure.
And so all of the data you give to them and what they're going to do with that data, because they haven't read all of these books, they're often selling them in many months in advance of galleys even existing or manuscripts even existing, and in your case, translations being done, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so you talk a little bit about what comp titles are and when one hears what that might be, the assumptions we all make about it, which are different than what it actually means in a book sales rep sort of terms. And so you say here, as I've been told over and over again, comp titles are for bookstores to know how many copies to order upfront based on 3-month sales of books similar in publisher, publicity access, marketing budgets, overall prominence to those of open letter. And then you go explain all this. You say, all of that is completely wrong. Relying on Consortium's expertise in this, which has been backed up by various sales reps, what makes a good comp title is a title with more paratextual similarities related much more closely to the publisher's position in the marketplace than the book itself. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so like when we do this in the class too, and when and I've done this too many times with Consortium. I kind of and partially wrote this in just so that, because I know that they always get mad at me, and I have to do my pre-sales tomorrow, in which they're gonna. I did it right this time, but generally I always include some comp titles that are comparable to our books based on the quality of the book or the nature of the book itself. So, for instance, like for Greater Music by Bei Swa, we compare it to The Vegetarian by Han Kang, who won the Man Booker Prize, but is also a Korean author that is very similar in sort of like established nature in Korea, and is one of the more young female writers that are doing things that are a little bit out of the ordinary. Although I think Bei Swa is way more interesting than Vegetarian. They're in that same grouping. But that is not the way that Consortium will allow us to do our comp titles. They want them to be different because that book was published by Pantheon. We are not Pantheon, so we cannot make a comparison between our book and a Pantheon book because the quality and the type of the book doesn't mean anything to them. What matters is like how likely your book is to sell based on the structure of your company, not on the book itself. And so we end up having to include things that are like, we always have to include books from like Deep Vellum, Coffee House, University Presses, Delkey, sometimes New Directions, but not if it's like Sebald, because that would be a bad comparison because Sebald sold a lot of copies, and the assumption is that these books will likely not sell a lot of copies, that he was a rarity versus most other authors. And I get that, I guess, but at the same time, it's one of these things where it's like a half self-fulfilling prophecy of like, well, yeah, our books are obviously not going to sell that well, so you probably shouldn't buy that many of them.
Right, and it's one of those things where it really discourages buyers at bookstores from taking a risk on something, at least in that particular setting, by which I mean the rep meeting with the buyer.
Yeah.
You can do all sorts of other things to sort of get that book advanced buzz, whether that's directly with that book buyer or on a wider scale with several of them, things like Winter Institute, right, to sort of supplement whatever it is the rep is going to say in that meeting.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a huge undertaking, and you can't do it for every book, and so you're sort of gambling on which one you think might be the one to break out. And even then, we're talking about going from maybe you sell 3,000 copies to maybe you sell 10,000 copies. It's not...
I'd be happy to sell 3,000 copies of most of these.
But it is this, limited sort of people, because you're a small press, people have this weird sort of innate expectation that nothing will ever be widely appealing to their
Right.
customer base, and no one acts as though that's a possibility. No one buys 20 copies to put on a display with the presumption that it's going to become a bestseller and instructs their floor staff to recommend it to everybody that comes through the door. It just doesn't happen, because as much as buzz as you can get on one store, I mean, to replicate that like over and over and over, hundreds of stores across the country. I mean, okay, realistically, 50 stores across the country that are like get behind a book like that,
Right.
and then somehow hope that there's going to be, a complimentary amount of buzz on Twitter and Facebook. It's tough. It's really tough because of that innate sort of bias against small publishers. And as much as we think it's going away, it never, ever goes away. We keep thinking there's going to be like these breakout books, sort of, whether it's Valeria breaking out for Coffee House and sort of paving the way for more things to sort of do what that did. It just the default is every season we sort of forget about that book and go back to the stuff that the reps from the big houses are yelling about. And,
Yep.
It sort of resets every season. Sorry.
Yep. That's what I got to do tomorrow.
What did it say? Okay, you're talking about this comparison to 700-page postmodern masterpiece in Infinite Jest, and it says, when it comes to books that aren't necessarily likely to sell 30,000 copies total, stores are deciding whether or not they should initially buy 3 copies for their shelf or 1. This is totally true. Maybe if you're really lucky, the store will order 7 for a display. To show buyers comparison to books that sold 50 copies in their first couple months is in no way helpful when the book they're considering is unlikely to sell more than 5. And that's where we're talking about like the comps.
Yep.
So you say there's something within these parameters that constantly nags at me. In this system, the quality and nature of the books themselves have been eliminated, and your chances of getting significant pre-sales depends on pre-existing size of your publishing house and how much money you have. Just totally true. It's really.
I forgot how depressing it was to write this until reading it. But yeah. That is, and that's the thing that's bothersome about it. It's like, and that's why these two things and the essay that came after it sort of all kind of link together in the way that like these structures feel immovable and not necessarily like the most democratic or the most intellectually honest. Like everything feels like a rigged system.
Well, it's a reflection of our larger socioeconomic situation in the world, isn't it?
Yeah, although I think that in terms of and when it comes to like book people and book things like this, we tend to whitewash that and pretend that's not really part of it.
Oh yeah, we pretend as though we're the most wholesome business in the fucking world.
And meanwhile,
we're robbing each other blind and trying to squash the little man, just like every other business out there.
Exactly. And so, what about the? I don't know if you had more parts, but I was going to say about the anticipated list, the whatchamacallit, the millions thing.
The millions thing. I looked through it earlier. Did you look through this?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have anything that you really want to talk about here?
I don't understand a few. No, because that's not going to be a nice thing to say.
I will just say this. I read, I would say 80% of the summaries of these books that I didn't know about already. The ones that I already knew about, I just sort of glossed over. I will just say there seems to be like a theme going on here in the kind of books that they now like, which I never really thought before. Are you getting that impression?
Interesting. What theme are you picking out?
I'm seeing a lot more like, I don't want to call them domestic because that's not fair, but a lot of like, books about relationships crumbling and how these things like very like person to person sort of thing.
Yeah.
Which is not to say that it's, not a totally valid subject for literary exploration. It's just, there seems to be a bit of a lack of like big, expansive sort of novels about the state of the world kind of thing. You know what I mean?
That's true. That's interesting.
I don't want to be totally generalizing here, but I'm just not seeing anything. And maybe that's just, a total coincidence on the books that are being published in the next 6 months. But I mean, I didn't count how many books this are. 6 a month. So let's say 30. 40?
I think there's even more than that, just scrolling through it. One of the things I noticed is that there weren't as many names, and this might be a reflection of my awareness, but maybe not. There's not as many people I hadn't heard of before. Like, I feel like...
Totally agree with that as well.
It was just sort of like, oh, well, and that person and that person.
Yeah, a lot of follow-up books. Like, this person had a book 2 years ago, here's their next one, kind of thing.
Yeah. And those ones I'm less interested in. I do think the Samantha Schweblin book will be interesting, Fever Dream.
Yes.
But she's most well known as a short story writer, so of course they did her novel.
Right. This Paul Auster book sounds terrible.
It sounds wretched. I like Paul Auster as a person and all that, but this sounds terrible.
Yeah. Do you know this book, Enigma Variations?
Okay, so that was the one I was going to make a mean comment about, is that we've gotten this book sent to us for review several times for no apparent reason, right? And I don't know this author, and it does not sound in any way like something I will ever want to read or care about. And I have now seen this, since being on this millions list, referenced at least 6 other places as like a book that everyone's looking forward to. And I can't figure out why, because it does not seem like anything more than book that exists.
Yeah, I mean, romantic, erotic Bildungsroman following protagonist Paul from Italy to New York, from adolescence to adulthood. Sounds like it's been done a million times.
Yeah, and there's nothing about it that looks or sounds interesting even when you get into it. I just don't get it. I'm missing something completely on this one. Maybe it's just the book that they've decided is going to be the one.
What about Galaxo, Hernan Roncino?
I was looking at that yesterday because it's entering it into the database, and that sounds kind of interesting.
Yeah, that definitely sounds interesting.
It's very short.
Let's see. Yeah, 100 pages. The Gringo Champion from Europa Editions. Do you know this one?
I know that because I've seen the cover and I entered it in, but I don't think we got a copy of it. So I don't really know. I don't know the author either.
Yeah. Or, Hilonen, I'm going to say. Spelled with an X at the beginning. Let's see. What else? Oh, God. I have to point this out only because it's hilarious. Okay. Selection Day by Aravind Adiga. If Selection Day goes on to hit it big, we may remember it as our era's definitive cricket novel.
There were only 2. There were only literally 2.
Yeah. I'm going to give a shout out. There's a new Robert Coover book. Love Robert Coover. Then The Fever Dream. Let's see.
That one's interesting. Then a lot of them is like the George Saunders book. Like, if you don't know about the George Saunders book, like this.
Yeah.
Is pointless.
Katsia's got a School Days of Jesus book. Yeah.
I like Allie Smith, but I don't know many people do.
Follow up to oh God, I'm totally blanking on the name of the book that won the Pulitzer.
Oh, the not the Refugees, the Sympathizer.
Sympathizer, thank you. His follow up, Viet Thanh Nguyen, comes out. I missed what month we're in here now. February. Oh, soon. I don't know if I know any of these. Ali Smith, you mentioned. Okay, do you know Mariana Enriquez? I feel like I've heard about this book. Things We Lost in the Fire.
Oh, yeah, I've seen this too, but I've not read it. I don't think we've actually gotten a copy of it yet, but I've seen the cover of it a bunch of times.
What else?
Yeah, that was sort of new.
Here's right below that.
Yeah, John Darnielle, our fan. I like John Darnielle a lot. I'll read this book.
I knew you would read this book. I don't really have any interest.
I don't think that this North Korean book is all that interesting. Except that it's from North Korea. Oh, it's way further down. Bondi, The Accusation.
I was still...
It's like the only North Korean book published.
Oh, there's another one here. Oh, To Japan. Sorry. I'm looking at Minji Lee.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Joan Didion.
What? Really? Oh, Hari Kunzru. I love Hari Kunzru. I don't know if you've ever read him, but I really like his writing.
Way back
I wouldn't
when.
say it's... White Tears, a fascinating sounding novel about musical gentrification and two white men whose shared obsession with hard-to-find blues recording leads them to perdition. Totally into that.
Yeah.
Joan Didion, look at that. Bondi. Okay, here's Bondi. It says, for readers interested in a candid look at life in North Korea, The Accusation, originally published in South Korea in 2014, will immerse you via the stories of common folk. You don't think it's very good?
I kind of looked at it, and it doesn't seem like it seemed. I think mostly it's the fact that it's from North Korea is more compelling than the book itself. Like this is one of those good examples of like this will be the Korean book that everyone buys and is displayed. Everyone will be like, oh, I know about Korea. I read this book called The Accusation, but there's like 12 other better Korean books, but they're not going to get any attention at all. It's just going to be this fucking book every time.
There's one here that I'm interested in called American War by Omar El Akkad, who is Canadian. And is reported in Afghanistan, the riots in Ferguson, blah, 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 or protests in Ferguson, sorry.
I have to say, like, oh, go on.
And it says, this brilliant and supremely disquieting debut novel opens in 2074, at the outbreak of the Second American Civil War.
Do you really think it'll take that long? Like, that's a fucking long time from now. I feel like that 2074 is really too far off in the future.
Yeah, that is.
If it said 2024, I'd be like, oh, yeah, this is totally, yeah.
What is this?
The Last Neanderthal?
What? I missed that one. Oh.
Yeah, these ones I know less about as it gets further out. Now, Sarah Gerard has a new book.
Essay collection.
New Haruki Murakami.
Oh, great. There was another one way down here that I saw that I was interested in, and I'm definitely not The Dinner Party by Joshua Ferris. No one can pronounce my name by Rakesh Sehgal. Do you know him?
No, I don't.
I don't think he lives in New York anymore, but he's a great guy. I'm very curious to read that book. One Day We'll All Be Dead and None of This Will Matter by Sashi Kool, who's a Canadian journalist.
Good title.
Yeah, it's a great title. And what else?
Percival Everett.
Yep. 30th book.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
That's a lot of books.
That is a ton of books. Dear Cyborgs.
Eugene Lim's a nice guy, too.
Yeah.
That book I'm interested in as well.
Yeah. Another Cormac McCarthy at some point in the year.
Hasn't that been referenced for like 19 years now or something like that?
The Laurent Binet, The Seventh Function of Language, is coming out at some point.
Boo.
Yeah.
This sounds better than the last book, but given how bad that last book was and how many people really loved it, I have a hard time thinking I'll take the time to read this.
Yeah, I'll give it a chance. He was a frequent customer at the bookstore at 18. He was a really nice guy and very smart. Like, I loved talking to him. For whatever, I did not like HHHH, and this one didn't really appeal to me. We'll see. That's it. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that I know is coming out anytime soon. I spent the last day or so going through all the books that are up for the Best Translated Book Award last year and sort of reading through the comments and trying to suss out what might win. And of course, I'm not going to say anything about that. But so my head's been in the last year instead of looking forward.
I just did all that to update that spreadsheet, and holy shit, there were like a ton of things I had to enter that had just built up over like a month, and it took forever. And there's so many titles that just ran through. And I just posted that. I haven't made a post about it yet, but I updated the overall translation database, the 2016 one and the 2017 one, which already has 215 titles on it. So it's getting there, and it's only January.
We're also so far from, actually ordering books for the store. Another couple months that it's very hard to like want to sit down and get excited about things because it's frustrating that
Are you guys when you
I
this is
where
a,
to put them.
yeah, I have a question for you about that though. When you go to make your first order, is there like there used to be like Ingram would offer like a base of like it's based on the size of your store, you need this core group of titles, or you could sign up for a program and get like a core whatever 1,000 number of books that are just ones that you should have. Are you guys ordering each one individually, or is there some sort of groupings that you're using to like fill out your inventory?
A little bit of both. Yes, Ingram does still do that program, and it's become much more refinable. We
Cool.
can say we don't have a cookbook section, so don't send any of those. Or like I remember at McNally, I'd started at McNally a few months after they'd opened, but they always told me they're like, God, we're still trying to get rid of these stupid idiots guides books that Ingram when they opened said nobody was paying attention. It's like you don't want that sort of thing sneaking in there, right?
No.
So basically the way we're doing it, the way we've decided, which helps that we're only selling about 8,000 books, is we've told everybody, hey, we're only having these sections. Tell us what you think we should have. And it gives us a starting point. And that way we can sort of fine tune it and say like, okay, oh yes, we want that, but oh, I forgot that they published this book and I'll remember it. Or, they'll list 2 Camus books, but not the 2 other ones that I would like to have as well. And sort of
right.
Gets you going. But then for some of the smaller presses that just are sort of ignored by their distributors, or it'd be better to just have a relationship with directly, I am going to them and asking for lists that I can take to the distributors in a fully fleshed out form. That way I don't miss anything. And we're going to miss things. That's just how it's going to go. I mean, but we have time, so we're trying to make sure that we cover all of our bases and all that sort of thing.
Sorry, go on.
We know we want to open at a certain time. Like, we really have to fine tune, like, just how many copies of, like, I don't know, like books that are popular now do we need to have in April when we first open, and that sort of thing. So
that's what I was just going to ask you. Of those 8,000, do you have a general breakdown of what's going to be like backlist titles versus books that are coming out in April, May, June?
I think the way we've figured it out is that like 1/10 of the stock at any given time will be on display on a table or staff picks kind of thing. Those don't all have to be books that were just published. I don't like the idea of just limiting those to new titles per se. I would like to keep some like, perennial sort of favorites on there, and that'll sort of guide just how many new books we buy with every season, with every catalog. We'll try to, keep it sort of lean in order to have a lot of room to fiddle with things as we go on. So yeah, it'll be roughly about 10%. We're having, like I said, 8,000 books, give or take 500 or so. And in theory, about 1,000 of those will be display books. We'll see. That's 3 like very large tables, like it's not, each pile is 6 books, it adds up pretty quickly. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It'll be interesting to see how this all plays out once you start getting it too. We can talk about it on the podcast rather regularly.
Yes. No, once we start getting, boxes of books and trying to shelve them and arrange them and all that sort of stuff. Even just like the thing, trying to figure out layouts. It's just one of these things you don't think about when you go into a store. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, where do I put poetry?
Right in the front.
Right. All poetry all on the table.
That used to be one of the problems at Schuler when I worked there, was that we used to complain that whenever they laid out the store, the books that were sort of the ones that you'd look at as you're standing in line to get checked out, and there's like Schuler is a huge store, and like the main part where the cash register, there's like 5 cash registers. And when you'd wait in line to go up to there, you'd be next to like animal books, and no one ever bought animal books. We'd always argue that it should be a different section there, but they never wanted to change it because that's what it was originally. And it was easier just to leave it like that. But now I just went in there over Christmas and it's completely different.
Yeah, no, that stuff, I mean, the impulse buys, what you put on the counter and all that sort of stuff. You have to really think about that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Okay, cool. This is sort of long. I don't have any rants or raves anyways for today. Well, I guess I do. I've been rewatching Twin Peaks. That's great.
Oh, I tried to rewatch it for like a third time maybe a month ago.
Oh, really?
Emma wasn't really into it, and I definitely lost interest in it. I just want to recommend the movie Moonlight. I know I'm probably late to the party on this, but damn, it's good. I want you to see it because there's something interesting structurally and formally about it that I think is very interesting and very sort of postmodern literary almost. So I don't know if it's still playing in the theater up there, but
it is. I just typed it in. It's in all the theaters.
Good. Well, it did get several nominations for Oscars. So
I thought the only movie that got nominated was La La Land.
For everything.
Every single thing. We did actually, one of our authors, like Georgy Gospodinov, The Physics of Sorrow, his short story was made into an animated short called Blind Vasha, and that's one of the finalists.
Seriously? Wow.
Yeah, and even like there's an interview with the director who's like, yeah, I read this story by Georgy Gospodinov a bunch of years ago, and it stuck with me, and so I made this movie.
Interesting.
So, yeah, kind of wild. So I hope that wins.
Me too. And yes, Moonlight. You should see it. It's really good. Really,
I'll check this out. Every time I saw the Moonlight, this is horrible. I always mixed it with Spotlight, the movie from last year, and I kept assuming they were the same movie.
They're nothing alike.
They're not in the least. I mean, remotely close.
Did that win Best Picture last year?
I think so.
Oh, God. Fucking Hollywood. I think it did, you're right. And La La Land is going to win, right? I mean,
like everything, I'm certain. I also will never see that movie.
No, there's no way. What was the one from like 3 years ago that was like black and white sort of musical? It was sort of French. Am I imagining this? Best Picture, and then no one ever talked about it ever again.
I don't know. But it doesn't. I can totally imagine that existing. It's sort of like, but hopefully it's not like the. You've seen all this stuff about the. Oh wait, what's the guy's name? The Sinbad movie, the genie movie.
What?
Have you ever heard about this? It's like a famous like internet Nelson Mandela effect sort of thing, where like people remember Sinbad being in this movie as a genie, but this never existed. It's not a real movie, but people will like insist that they like own the video store and they rented this movie bunches of times. They've watched it. They'll recount like entire plots, but this movie does not exist in any way, shape, or form. That's
crazy. There was the one with Shaq.
Right. There's the one with Shaq, which everyone that remembers the other one is like, oh no, that was like the ripoff where they remade the movie. And we all wouldn't watch it. And I've never seen that. And they have different plots. Like when people describe it, they have different plots. That are sort of similar, but not close enough. Where they're like, no, that was like the remake, dumb one. It's a weird thing.
It was called The Artist, that movie.
Oh, right.
It was from 2011. I'm old.
Wow. That was going to be my joke for you. I forgot. Was that at Winter Institute, there's a special evening for young professionals. Are you going to go to the young professionals meeting? Because I went to a young professionals thing here in Rochester last week, and I felt like the worst, oldest, shittiest person ever. Like, I couldn't even take it. I just had to get out of there immediately.
I don't think I would feel comfortable doing that at all. I mean, also, professional career is sort of young. No, I don't know.
I think it should count. Also, if you meet Ed Brubaker when you're there, he's listed as one of the authors. He wrote part of Westworld, and he does comic books, and he's written other things as well, but you would totally dig him.
Yeah, I actually think I've corresponded with him before, and I could not tell you why. What on earth it might have been, but there was some reason we were in touch at some point.
He's very knowledgeable on like noir and both film and writing and Hollywood history and stuff like that, and he's super cool. I think you'd really dig him.
Oh, I think it had to do with Low Life.
I gave him a copy of Gessel Dome at BEA because it's a book that's like noir about this little town that's like that's taking place like when everyone's poor and they just like fucking kill each other and no one tries to solve any crime, and he's like, that's exactly what I'd want to read.
I can't remember. Anyway, yes, I remember him being a nice guy, and I definitely want to meet him. I saw that he was going to be there too. Could not remember why, but Yeah, there's always a few authors that, I never pay attention to who's going, and then they're there. I'm like, oh, always wanted to meet you. You're
Yeah.
awesome. It's good for that. And
There's
it's
a lot of people
setting than fucking BEA.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of people listed here too. Most of them whom are like, I don't know either because they're like have this their first book or it's like just a different realm of things. But there's a ton of people.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'm gonna look myself.
Anyways, okay, we should probably cut this.
I gotta pack. Our flight is very early in the morning, so.
Well, have fun, and hopefully the Timberwolves will go 2-0 while you guys are there. They're making a run.
All right.
Talk to you later, man.
See you later. Bye.